Whether your business is small, medium, large or extra large, there's a retirement solution for every type of business. oldmutualsuperfund.co.za.
Joining me now is Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan. Thanks so much for your time, sir. Looking at the reaction that you've got directly after the budget speech, what would you say is the temperature out there?
It's very warm, but in a welcoming way, and very positive in all the feedback that we've got. And people appreciate that these are tough times in which, once again, we've been able to find the right balance between making sure that we cut expenditure but not too much, conveying a message that it's possible to grow this economy faster and get more resources to solve some of the problems that are part of a long history of disadvantage in this country. And importantly, that there's possibilities for different sections of South African society to jointly contribute to some of the things that government is suggesting, and that's an exciting prospect.
Going into the budget, Minister, many policymakers, economists were saying that this is the toughest budget in a decade. Did it cause you many sleepless nights?
It did. It did. Budgets are about balancing acts, and it's about managing demands from various quarters for sometimes contradictory purposes. So some will say tax more and spend more. Others will say cut more and don't worry about increasing taxes. And I think what we listen to very carefully and think very carefully about is how do we constantly take this economy forward? How do we constantly create optimism amongst the South African population? And at the same time ensure that at a technical level we have a sound fiscal base, not just for today, but for many years to come.
Talking about that sound fiscal base, was it unnerving having the rating agencies breathing down your neck at this point? Obviously 2 rating agencies having us on negative ratings watch at the moment. I've spoken to Conrad Royce, Managing Director of Standard & Poor's, and he seems unnerved by the budget deficit being at that 5.2% level when it comes to GDP percentage.
Well, it shouldn't be, because we had this particular set of circumstances arising from the global crisis in which his company, amongst others, made a contribution. The global crisis wouldn't have come to the United States or anywhere in the world had ratings agencies not given the wrong kind of ratings to those derivative products that originated in the US. So they've got to think very hard about their contribution to this. But more importantly, we've had a lower corporate income tax in particular, and to some extent personal income tax, as a result of dynamics both coming from the global side and in terms of the events in the mining sector and other sectors of South Africa. So we've got a 16 billion rand revenue loss potentially as we go to the 31st of March. And it's too late in the year to make any other kind of adjustment in terms of a year that's almost finished. So we have just the rest of March left. So the 5.2 is, if you like, an automatic adjustment that actually needs to be made. A second factor, which perhaps people don't talk about because it's a technical issue, is that you had an adjustment of the GDP number in South Africa that made in the 2012-13 year 0.1.5 contribution to the 5.2 that we are actually talking about as well. Minor, but not unimportant.
Let's talk now about the positives. National Development Plan has been tabled heavily as a solution to South Africa's economic problems. Is it realistic that it's going to get us to that 5% growth rate, and if so, over what time period?
Look, there are many countries in the world that over a 20-30 year period came from very low levels of growth and low levels of development and a great amount of poverty to a completely different status, whether it's Malaysia, Taiwan, South Korea. There are any number of examples of that. Today in Latin America, similar things are happening as well, where economic activity is being managed in a particular way, but more importantly social distribution is being managed in a particular way. So yes, it is doable. The important ingredient we've got to get right in South Africa is a unity of purpose. If we can get business, labor, government and society more generally agreeing that we have a vision of where we want to go in 20 years, agreeing that all of us have a role to play in this exercise and make a contribution, and all of us have got to give something. then we can make it.
I was speaking to SARS Commissioner Opa Magashula just a moment ago and asked him whether you've made his job easier or harder. He says that you keep making it harder and harder. Looking at that corporate tax rate, there are critics out there who say that we should be, or the revenue should be unlocking the billions of rands on corporate balance sheets, and that the corporate tax rate should not have remained at the 28% level. That's a surprising question.
Yeah, no, I think, nobody, individuals, corporates, people who buy excisable goods will all want lower rates of taxes. We've got to understand the context we are in. And if you're going to take the advantage of lower rates or whatever...
Higher rates, because to unlock those billions, surely you need to tax more.
Well, yeah, you've got to tax more on the one hand, but even within the 28% level, if we get better compliance, and if you get more investment from companies rather than holding on to cash, if people are able to take just a few more risks than they're taking at the moment, we could have a very different scenario within a year in terms of the levels of growth, the kind of revenue base that we will be looking at, and the revenue that government will have to attend to the social issues that we are plagued with.
You made very favorable comments about South African companies being able to grow into or onto the continent. How quickly are we going to be able to execute on that front?
That's for the companies to execute. I think what we are doing is providing the enabling platform, and as we are getting feedback, if you notice, all 3 years of this administration, we've made changes. Incrementally, I think this time is even more fundamental, to enable companies to go and invest in Africa, and to also partner with government, something we don't do well enough in South Africa, let's be frank. So you talk to the Brazilians or the Chinese or the Indians or even the French for that matter, government and business have a common purpose. We in South Africa need to develop that.
Do you think that ease of access is going to help boost, now this is between South Africa and Africa, is going to help boost GDP in South Africa, given that the African Development Bank is forecasting Africa, ex-South Africa, to grow at around 6%?
No, absolutely. We have many things that no country in Africa has, in terms of financial services, the legal services, the whole services area, plus skills in mining, in agriculture, and in construction. So if we get our act right, and if we do business the ethical way, both in Africa and in South Africa, what we want is a win-win outcome, where the African countries benefit and their economies grow, but the contributions that we make result, as I pointed out in the speech, in tax revenue and jobs in the South African context as well.
Just in terms of Brazil, Russia, India, China, we've got the BRICS summit at the end of March. Do you expect exciting things to happen on that platform as well? You again made mention of it in your budget speech.
No, absolutely. These are historical processes. They take time to mature, to bind, and to produce results. But on the finance front, I've already announced the kind of projects that we're working on, which are all very exciting. So if we can, and I'm sure we will get an in-principle agreement from the leaders that move on to the next step of the development bank, which is what we call a BRICS-led development bank. In a few years' time, we'll be able to rally all sorts of resources, not just for South Africa, but for Africa as well. If we can get the reserve pulling, that provides immense security for all of our countries. So I think those are just two examples. What we need to focus on a lot more, though, is how we can more assertively do trade as South Africa with these bigger countries.
And of course, I have to end the conversation with a tough question, and that is how much of not raising tax rates this time around is because there's an election year next year?
No, politics plays a part, but it's not the sole determinant of what we do. What we thought it wiser, that rather than make an ad hoc decision on a particular tax now and another ad hoc decision later, if we're serious about getting a review of our tax system, let that review take place. And let that review get this balance right between what levels of taxation and what type of tax instruments do we need on the one hand, and on the other hand, how do we promote growth, employment and development. And I think this review committee gives us an opportunity to look at it holistically. And remember, this doesn't mean that there are no increases forever. All this means is that enjoy yourself this year while it lasts. Well,
that's exactly, you brought me to another final question. When are we going to expect those hikes? Are they going to happen down the line, or are you just going to watch the temperature of the economy?
No, if you look at what we're saying, we've got this tax review which will tell us what I've just said about the instruments and about what yields we get from them. We have a long-term fiscal plan, which at least now has a 20-year trajectory, which says if you carry on at the current rate of social commitments, if X, Y, and Z happen, you're going to manage. If A, B, and C happen, you will not manage. But it also says that you might have to raise certain taxes if you want to get a phenomenally different health system than the one we have. We've said constantly we will not impose increases unnecessarily. South Africa, on the whole, has a very compliant bunch of taxpayers, and we owe that to them.
I think that's a good place to leave it, Minister. Thank you so much for your time. As always, I've been speaking to Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan here in Parliament. We're taking a short break. See you on the other side.